Welcome to our Human Geography Taster Lecture. My name is Debbie Perlman-Hoogie and I'm a Senior Lecturer in Rural Geography and Planning here at the University. This is a shortened version of a second year lecture about the legacy of placemaking in Hertfordshire, Back to the Future. It gives you an idea of the type of knowledge you'll acquire at the University, but it does build on your A-level syllabus relating to changing places and making places. To start then, a question. Have you ever thought about where the University of Hertfordshire is located and why it's in Hatfield and not in our county town of Hertford? Well, the story of how it got to be what and where it is today is one so very relevant to human geographers. In fact, I'd say it's a quintessential and core part of what we're about. It's about how people in the past tackled problems and then what we can learn from them in the contemporary world. It's about knowing that problems don't happen in isolation and that they are often complex and multifaceted. It's about critically engaging with the wider context. Understanding that is a very important part of studying human geography. Central to the narrative is the need for change, the need to change people's lives for the better. First of all, we need to contextualise that need for change in the socio-economic and political situation of 18th and 19th century Britain. Manufacturing became the mainstay of the economy, and the UK was a major player in global trade, and it dominated Western capitalist laissez-faire economics, supported by the ill-gotten gains of colonialism. This industrialisation triggered unchecked and unplanned urbanisation. Factories were built and mines were dug, and people migrated from country to town for work. By the end of the 19th century, the population had increased fourfold. But workers' housing was built in a haphazard, unplanned and uncontrolled manner. It was built quickly and cheaply, and no thought was given to it. Profit appeared to be the motive. Chaotic towns and cities were the results. Slums were created, leaving a legacy of unhealthy living and working conditions. In these overcrowded towns and cities, where people paid extortionate rents to live in squalid conditions, those at the bottom of the social ladder lived in unfit dwellings, poorly and quickly built, back-to-backs and tenements. They were damp, bug-infested and poorly ventilated. Towns and cities also had non-existent or very poor sanitation. Sewage ran through houses and into the streets. Cholera and typhoid were rife. There was no running water, and people drank from contaminated wells and pumps. In fact, it was quite clearly safer to drink beer and gin, creating a whole other problem of alcoholism. And people didn't realise until the 1850s that typhoid was a waterborne disease. The towns and cities also had very high densities. In the slums, there were up to 15 people living in 1 or 2 rooms. And this, of course, meant that disease spread easily. There was no NHS, and there were only rudimentary medical solutions, often involving arsenic. High densities also meant overcrowding. People had large families. There was no contraception. There was a high birth rate, but also a high death rate, which included a very high rate of infant mortality. In 1850, life expectancy at birth was 42 years old, but actually, if you survived till you were 5, you had a much better chance, and those who lived to 5, actually the life expectancy rose to the age of 57. Unsafe working conditions in unregulated factories with long hours and poor wages made for a pretty wretched existence in what we would call urban squalor. Poverty and poor living conditions were deemed a social ill, and were actually sometimes seen as brought upon themselves their own fault. And this is all graphically depicted by authors such as Charles Dickens. Do have a good read of Oliver Twist, and remember for them that the workhouse was never far away. The industrial cities therefore became spatially and class divided. But there were a large group of people who did notice what was happening and were trying to do things differently and change processes. Early evidence of this was from Friedrich Engels. He wrote The Condition of the Working Class in England in 1845, and it was based on his work in Manchester. And it demonstrated that there was a cause and effect between industrialisation, working people who were living in very poor conditions, and disease and high death rates. This then influenced Karl Marx, and together they wrote Das Kapital, showing the evils of capitalism. And of course, the rest is history in the form of communism and socialism, which of course has had a massive effect on millions of people's lives. In England, the social reform movement started at about the same time, and amongst others, people like William Wilberforce campaigned to end slavery. William Booth set up the Salvation Army, dedicated to reducing poverty and saving souls. And some, like Robert Owen, built model factories and villages to make their workers' lives better. This is Saltaire, near Bradford, and the owner of the factory, Titus Salt, wanted a fitter, healthier workforce, so built a model village around his factory. Other model villages included Bournville in Birmingham, set up by the Cadburys, and New Earswick in York, set up by the Rowntrees. It's actually no coincidence but that these are both chocolate makers. Do have a think about the connection, and I'll let you know at the end what the answer is. One social reformer was Ebenezer Howard, pictured here. His ideas were rooted in a radical utopian philosophy. The vision in this case, for him, was for an ideal city. He dreamed of a better world. But what Ebenezer Howard did, and why it's so special, is that he took it all one step further and planned and implemented his vision. He had a wide vision of social reform that would improve and transform the lives of poor people. Ebenezer Howard was an ardent cooperative socialist. He believed his ideas could change the social and economic nature of society for the better. His ideal city was to be a combination of town and country, with space and greenery, good quality housing, and a full range of social, educational and leisure facilities, good jobs, places to grow food, and all the right facilities to build a community, all in an attempt to set society on a different course. It was a really revolutionary concept, and the concept was the Garden City. And you can see his very famous diagram of the three magnets, one depicting town with all its problems, one depicting country with all its benefits, and his third magnet at the bottom, his town-country magnet that would combine the best things of town and country together. So his vision came together and to fruition in Letchworth in Hertfordshire. First Garden City Limited, a private company, was set up in 1903 to test and prove the validity of Ebenezer Howard's Garden City principles by developing the world's first garden city, which sought to combine the very best of town and country living to create healthy homes for working people. Two architects, Barry Parker and Raymond Unwin, created a master plan and the arts and crafts Letchworth look cottage-style housing, as seen in the picture here. The Garden City principles that Ebenezer Howard lived by included land value capture for the benefit of the people, long-term stewardship of assets, mixed tenure housing, affordable to everyone, beautifully designed homes with gardens, generous green spaces, integrated transport systems, to name a few. But you can see from this photo how Letchworth Garden City has matured into a very successful place to live and work. These principles for building new settlements are now as important and relevant today as they were 120 years ago. The COVID-19 pandemic has exposed clear inequalities in housing and access to open space. And the Garden City principles were used again just down the road in Welwyn Garden City, which is celebrating its centenary this year. This visionary solution has been replicated all over the world in suburbs and towns and cities, and the concept is enshrined in English planning policy today. But these brave visions didn't solve all the country's problems. Poverty, poor housing and poor living conditions persisted for many. Indeed, they were just about to get worse. The Second World War and the Blitz made sure of this, and they created a legacy of damaged housing and disrupted infrastructure. There was a need to improve urban conditions on a grand scale. It was all part of the post-war vision for Britain and was very much part of the establishment of the welfare state, which included universal healthcare, free education and unemployment allowance, all representing liberal interventionist politics. And the garden cities inspired the post-war planners with the concept of new towns, moving people from war-torn areas of London to a series of newly built towns in a ring around London, with a green belt in between. The government compulsorily purchased the land and built planned settlements. This was visionary planning on a huge scale. And you can see on the map the settlements included, including 4 in Hertfordshire. Master plans were prepared and implemented by development corporations. And this was all part of Abercrombie's Greater London Plan. The first new town was designated in Stevenage in 1946. The second was in Hatfield, and the fourth was in Hemel Hempstead. Welwyn Garden City was also expanded as well. And all of these are in Hertfordshire, giving us an amazing legacy of planned settlements to study. I'm just wondering if you can name any other new towns, either from the first, second or third wave. So here's the list, so you can see if you could, if you knew any of them. You'll probably recognise a few, but another famous one from the third wave is of course Milton Keynes. The new towns of Hertfordshire were built in a very trendy modernist style and included the first pedestrian town centre in Stevenage. But we have to ask ourselves, how does it look and feel now? We need to question the contemporary situation of how they have matured and grown, because, of course, new towns are no longer new. Did they actually adopt Garden City principles? Have they been successful? Is their design appropriate for the way we live today? Have socio-economic issues replicated themselves? Are they now car-dependent places? Are our new towns actually sustainable settlements or not? And what can we do about it? So, back to my question about the University of Hertfordshire. The main employment centre in Hatfield New Town was the de Havilland aircraft building firm, famous for its Mosquito aircraft, and this later became incorporated into British Aerospace. The University of Hertfordshire site was originally the technical college to train employees. It then became Hatfield Polytechnic, and in 1992 the University of Hertfordshire, hence its location in Hatfield and not Hertford. We have a very proud heritage and all of it on our doorstep for you to investigate as part of your studies, learning from past legacies and then looking to the future. For example, investigating key issues such as planning, transport and the regeneration of our new towns. Our students have various opportunities to become involved in this real world work via work placements, roundtable discussions and design charrettes and living labs. The university is also very proud to be the home of the Ebenezer Howard School of Planning, providing postgraduate planning education. And finally, back to my chocolate question. So, the link between chocolate and model villages are the Quakers, a group of nonconformist Christians who didn't drink alcohol. They moved into chocolate in the form of cocoa drinks in the 19th century as a reaction against the perceived misery and deprivation caused by alcohol, all that beer and gin, because it was safer than water. Quakers actually had social reform at their very core, hence the need to create better living conditions for their workers. And a huge bonus for us, of course, over the years has been the democratisation of chocolate and the invention of Cadbury's dairy milk. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture. Thank you very much for listening. If you're interested in finding out more, please look at our website, watch us on our YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter. Thank you. Goodbye.